Hello, everybody. I'm Aya Hussein, a PhD candidate at University of New South Wales in Canberra. My presentation will be on investigating the role of trust in human-automation interaction. This work has been done under the supervision of Dr. Sonsel Sawah and Professor Hussein Abbas. I'll start by presenting the motivation that makes large amount of research dedicated to the study of trust in human-automation interaction. Then I'll investigate the role of trust in the interaction from the point of view of theory as well as the point of view of the experimental studies. After that, I'll present a user study that we conducted to study the role of trust in human-swarm interaction. And finally, I'll present the results and discuss the implications of the findings. So why this interest in the concept of trust in human-automation interaction? Well, actually, we are in an era that's characterized by astonishing advances in automation capabilities. So we see the robots everywhere. They are now in industry, at hospitals. There are robots for homes. We have unmanned vehicles, self-driving cars, and so on and so on. However, regardless how advanced these automations are, people may not use it until they trust it. So actually we have, in literature, there are lots of accidents that have been documented due to automation disuse or overuse. So in some scenarios, people would reject the automation and refuse to use it, which can lead to catastrophic consequences. For example, some pilots would disengage the autopilot in severe weather conditions, leading to their planes crashing. Or maybe, on the contrary, they can overuse or over-rely on the automation without doubly checking its action, leading again to unpleasant ramifications. So this actually made many researchers interested in the concept of trust and how it affects human reliance on the automation. So what exactly is the role that trust plays in the interaction? Does trust determine reliance? In other words, is the level of human trust in automation, which is based on automation characteristics, is it what really determines human reliance on automation, such that if someone trusts the automation more, this means that they will rely on it more? If this is really the case, this would be quite interesting, because this means that by calibrating the level of trust in a certain automation, we can change the level of human reliance on it. Or trust is just a mere indicator of the reliance. So it's just an auxiliary variable, while actually reliance is directly and completely determined by automation characteristics. In that case, much less interest will be devoted to trust. So we'll discuss this role from the point of view of theory. According to theory, and now I'll talk about a very well accepted model, which has been proposed by Lian Xi. This model actually describes the dynamics of trust in the interaction and how it interact with other factors. But most relevant to our study is the relation between automation performance and trust and the effect on reliance. So according to this model, the level of human trust in automation is determined by the performance of the automation and how frequent it makes errors, and how accurate or how well is the automation in terms of achieving the task assigned to it. Based on this, the level humans base their level of trust in automation. And according to the degree of trust or this level of trust in automation comes the level of reliance, such that the more the trust, the more the reliance. So here we would say that trust mediates the relationship or the effect of automation performance on the level of reliance. This model is actually quite accepted in literature, and there are lots and lots of work that has been done based on this model. However, we also need some experimental support to this model. So to study this role experimentally, we need to perform what's called the mediation analysis. A variable M is called to mediate the effect of the independent variable X on the dependent variable Y if two conditions apply. First, X has to affect M, and M has to affect Y. And we call that X affects M or M affects Y if two conditions apply. The first is that we need to see correlation between X and M, and correlation between M and Y. So as X changes, M it changes, and as M changes, Y changes as well, and this correlation has to be significant. And we also need to comply with the temporal precedence. By temporal precedence, we mean that to say that X is the cause of M, then the change of X has to precede the change of M. And similarly, the change of M needs to precede the change of Y. In this way, we can say that X causes M and M causes Y. So the first condition for the mediation analysis is that we can see effect from X on M and from M on Y. And the second condition is that this indirect effect that's exhibited as length AB need to be statistically significant. So in our case, X is the automation performance, and M is the human trust in automation, and Y is the level of human reliance on automation. So in our experimental design, we need to change the automation performance and see how the change in automation performance result in change in the level of trust, and how this in turn result in a change of level of reliance. So actually, there has been a few number of studies that were dedicated to investigating the mediation role of trust. So actually, many of these studies, as you can see, 3 of the 4 studies couldn't detect the mediation role of trust. So they basically found that the effect of X on M and M on Y insignificant, statistically insignificant. And only one study found that the mediation role was statistically significant. So we need to understand the reason for these contradicting results. Why getting mixed results? Why did we get these mixed results? And what should be the true result? what does this mean? Does mediation really exist or not? So by scrutinizing these results, we could identify a number of problems with the experimental design or the statistical analyses that lead to these contradicting results. And now I'll summarize or highlight the main reasons why we got these contradicting results without digging deeper into the details of each experiment. So one main reason why researchers didn't find the mediation to be significant is that they have in their experiments they have two conditions: a condition with type 1 error, and in the other condition they changed the type of error from type 1 to type 2. So basically, rather than changing the frequency of the errors or to affect the performance of the automation, they changed the type of the error exhibited by the automation. And in these experiments as well, both types of error were equally detrimental to the performance. So condition A has some error which lead to bad performance. Condition B has a different type of error, but that also led to almost a similar performance. In this way, as the performance of the automation did not change significantly, of course, we wouldn't expect to see a significant effect or a significant change on trust, nor a significant change in reliance. And this is what happened. They didn't really find significant changes on trust and reliance, but mistakenly they concluded that the trust does not play a mediation role in the interaction. Also, in some experiments, researchers have had some confounding variables in their experiments. So in condition A, they have the automation with certain performance. And in condition B, they changed the performance of the automation, but they also changed some other variable. So they changed, for example, they changed the type of tasks that participants do, or they changed some other variable, not just the performance of the automation, which of course, these changing two variables at the same time is a serious problem, is known to be a serious problem in experimentation, because basically the effect of one variable can be cancelled by the effect of the other variable, and we can't separate these effects from each other. So in that case, again, researchers couldn't find significant mediation, but and they concluded that trust does not play a mediation role, but we say that the existence of such a confounding variable could have led to these misleading results. Other studies also measured trust in a way that does not comply with the temporal precedence requirement, and we said that to say that trust causes reliance or affects reliance, then the changes in trust has to be has to happen before the change in reliance. But some researchers measured the trust at the end of the experiment, so they didn't comply with the temporal precedence requirement. So actually, the only study that found that the mediation role of trust was significant didn't have any of these experimental issues. And we actually believe that as long as we avoid such experimental problems, we should detect a significant mediation role of trust. In this part of the experiment, this part of the presentation, sorry, I'll present a user experiment that I performed to study the role of trust in human-swarm interaction. And within the design of our experiment, we of course avoided the problem that we just discussed. So in our experiment, subjects performed a simulated task in which they were asked to collect the maximum number of target objects. In the simulation environment, they have a swarm of robots that were tasked to search for objects in the environment. And once they found an object, the swarm tried to identify its type, whether it's a target or a non-target object. And based on that, it recommends an action. So if the swarm believes it's a target object, it would recommend collecting it to maximize the score. And if it's a non-target object, it will recommend discarding it to save the time game, as collecting objects is a time-consuming process. And for each recommendation, the user or the subject can accept the recommendation because these recommendations are really fast. They can identify the type of each object in a timely manner, but they are also imperfect. So sometimes they can be inaccurate, or the swarm can provide you with an incorrect recommendation. Alternatively, the subject can select to verify the type of recommendation. So they would inspect the type of the object themselves to decide whether they should collect or discard it. But the verification was a time-consuming process. So each subject performed 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, the order of the scenario was counterbalanced to avoid learning effects. And the independent variable was the accuracy of the recommendation. So in one scenario, the accuracy was high, about 90%, and in the other scenario was the accuracy was 70%. And the dependent variables we measured were the trust and the reliance. So we measured trust using short questionnaire. So actually every 2 minutes the game would pause, and subjects were asked to rate their current level of trust in the recommendation. This is how we measured the trust. And we measured reliance as a percentage of accepted recommendations. We had 32 subjects who completed, each subject completed the 2 parts of, or the 2 conditions of the experiment. We collected 4 observations per each subject, per each scenario. Each observation is in the form, each observation is in the form of reliability, trust, and reliance. So the reliability is the actual accuracy of the recommendation in a time frame of 2 minutes. Trust is the level of trust reported by participant at the end of the 2 minutes. And reliance is the percentage of the accepted recommendation in the next 2 minutes. In this way, we comply with the temporal precedence requirement for the mediation analysis. Overall, we had 256 observations. To statistically analyze these results, we performed within subject mediation analysis, which is basically like mediation analysis, but it acknowledges that many observations come from the same object, from the same subject, and thus would be correlated. So it takes this into consideration. What we found was actually that all the relationships were statistically significant. So the effect of reliability on trust was positive and statistically significant, and the effect of trust on reliance was as well statistically significant. Overall, the indirect effect of reliability on reliance through trust was again statistically significant from 0. Thus, we conclude that trust indeed mediates the relationship between automation reliability, or in this case swarm reliability, and human reliance on the automation. This, of course, agrees with the theory as described in Lee and C's model. Here is a graphical representation of the results. By moving from low reliability to high reliability scenarios, the level of trust reported by subject exhibited a significant increase, and there was also significant increase in the level of reliance on the automation. So as we improve the reliability from 70% to 90%, we found that participants increased the rate of reliance by 34%. So they would rely more by 34% on the provided recommendation. 21% of this increase was attributed to the increase of trust. So actually trust was responsible for 20% of this increase. Although in Lee and C model they would show trust as the main or the prime mediator or the prime predictor of reliance. We found that it's not doesn't seem to be the prime mediator or the prime predictor of trust. It's just accounted for 21% of this increase. However, we believe that the role of trust is much higher than that, and that this was just underestimated due to measurement errors. So it is well known that the mediation analyses that include internal variables like trust could be underestimated as we measure these internal variables by questionnaires, and there could be measurement and errors in these questionnaires, leading to underestimating the actual role of this internal variable. So what does this mean? This means a very important thing. It means that the appropriate calibration of trust becomes quite critical to the performance, so or to the correct reliance behavior. In other words, given a certain automation, we could change the rate of reliance on this automation by just calibrating trust. And we can calibrate trust by different ways, using, for example, pre-task training, or using transparency, automation transparency, and we can disclose the level of reliability of the automation beforehand. So here, our results conclude that efforts for appropriate calibration of trust becomes really critical to the correct reliance behavior. The limitations of our study is that we adopted a performance-centric view of trust. Well, actually, trust can be affected by some characteristics other than performance. For example, the transparency or the integrity of the automation. However, most literature on human automation interaction focus on the performance-centric view of trust. That's why we mainly in this work focused on this view of trust. However, we would extend our work to see how other characteristics like the automation affects trust as well. We also handle trust in isolation to other factors like the workload on the human and the risk, although these factors may interact with trust to determine the level of reliance. So in summary, in this presentation, we discussed the role of trust in human-automation interaction, both from the point of view of theory, and we also discussed the experimental studies and investigated why the results contradict among each other and not support the theory. Then we presented a user study we performed in human swarm interaction tasks to study the role of trust, and within this study we avoided the problems exhibited in other studies, and we indeed found the role of trust to be significant. This is a list of the main references I used in my presentations. Thank you for listening. If you have any question, please feel free to send to my email. Thank you.